What's going on, guys? This is Empty Box, and today we're going to be talking about force feedback, specifically force feedback clipping. This can best be thought of as a speaker, if you will. The sim is basically your radio, your force feedback wheel is your speaker. You can turn up the sim really loud, and it will be a really loud force feedback. It'll be very heavy, very difficult, very strong, but it'll also sound like crap. Same thing as if in your car you turn up the speakers really loud. Yeah, it's really loud, but it's crap. So you want to make sure you get that fine line between where it's loud and nice and hearable, clear, crystal clear, crisp sounds, and not too loud to the point where the speaker is actually breaking up. Very simple to think about, really, once you actually get used to it. This is something that a lot of newer drivers overlook, and they just do this. Force feedback. Yeah, I want some force feedback strength. Oh, I'm a man. Let's crank that up. That's not what you want to do because, again, you're basically making your speaker, quote-unquote, aka your force feedback wheel, sound like crap. It's trying to do too much at the same time. This is the same in any sim. This is not iRacing specific in any regard. Pretty much any sim within the last 10 years, you need to consider this and make sure you get your force feedback set up properly. Anyways, force feedback on, linear mode, I got that on. That's an iRacing specific option. Is basically saying that small bumps will be small bumps, big bumps will be big bumps. It's not trying to keep your wheel from clipping, which it will do if you run with that setting off. So we have that on. I would suggest using that here in iRacing, but again, that's an iRacing specific option. Strength, that is your overall force feedback strengths. That's the same option in R Factor, Assetto Corsa, Project Cars, all those other sims. Okay, that's going to depend on your wheel, the type of wheel, and a little bit of driver preference. Don't just go, oh, he's using 9.2, I should use 9.2 too, because he's doing okay, I guess, so I'll just steal his settings. You have to actually figure this value out. You do have to put in a little bit of effort and a little bit of brain power. Damping is, again, driver preference mostly. It's suggested that you run as little damping as you possibly can. That way you're getting the raw force feedback that you're being told. In R Factor 2, this is largely called force feedback smoothing, more or less. Same type of effect. It's basically exactly what it sounds like, damping. It's basically smoothing the forces out so they're less aggressive. And minimum force is an iRacing specific option that's basically telling the sim what is the minimum amount of force that your wheel can provide. What is the lightest force feedback, more or less. So anyways, let's go ahead and jump in, and I'll give you guys a visual demonstration about force feedback clipping here. It's very hard to explain, so it's just easier to see in a visual sense. Now right now we have a setting that should work pretty well. You'll see in the upper right hand corner there's a series of bars up there. You might be wondering, what are those for? Well, the top couple are for just connection issues, just making sure that you're connected and seeing if you have lag issues or anything like that. But that bottom bar, that is the one that we want to take a look at here today, the F bar. Now, as you can probably guess, F for feedback. And as you can see, it moves around when I turn the wheel as I go over bumps and as things happen in the sim. Yep, because that's a visual representation of what the sim is telling my wheel to do. Think about it as a frequency wave, basically. If you've ever opened up an audio file on your computer, you've probably seen a bunch of bars, a bunch of wiggly waves and all that good stuff. Same thing. The goal here with iRacing is to basically keep that as green as possible, but not turn it yellow or red too much. When you get into the red, you are clipping. When you're getting into the yellow here, that's just iRacing basically telling you, well, your wheel's got some pretty strong force feedback going on right now. In the other sims, they do have the same meter system. For example, in R Factor 2, there's a plugin that I use. It's TechAid's Pedal Analyzer plugin, which has that yellow bar in the upper left-hand corner that you see in my R Factor 2 videos. Assetto Corsa, they lump the force feedback meter in with the pedals. Which you might be wondering, why do I have 4 pedals when I pull up this little app in the sim? It's actually your force feedback. Netcar Pro, fun enough, was actually the first sim that I know of to use this bar system. Project Cars, you simply access the force feedback information by pulling up the telemetry. It's there in the upper left-hand corner for now, but that is subject to change, of course. So as you can see, we're not necessarily driving that fast. I apologize. I just wanted something a little bit different here in the V8 supercar, but it's pretty much telling us what we need to know. We're not really fighting against the car too much. It's telling us what is going on. We're not having any clipping issues. That's what we want. We want the maximum strength of the force that we can get without saturating the wheel. So let's go ahead and turn that force feedback up. This is going to cause the wheel to start clipping, and it's basically going to make things a mess. It will become very numb, but I will have a very heavy wheel. So watch that meter once again. And full clipping. Now, it might be really weird to think about, but as soon as I turn in, as the wheels get a little bit of weight on them, I can't feel anything more. It's just basically resistance. That's really all that it is at this point. There is no detail, there is no information being told to me other than the fact that I am turning. It just makes the wheel extraordinarily heavy, but there's absolutely no detail at all. That's not what you want. You basically control that with your force feedback strength. You can also do it in rFactor 2 with the car-specific force feedback multiplier, which can be used to help control your force feedback. But would there ever be a use for this? Would you ever want a lot of clipping? And the answer is yes and no. No, you don't want it to happen. Technically, you probably should never want this to happen. However, a couple of seasons ago when I drove the Corvette C6R GT1 here in iRacing, I was clipping a good bit, more than you technically should be. Why? So that way the wheel had some resistance. Weighten up that wheel, make it harder to steer, a little bit more natural, because a car with no resistance in the steering is really weird. Just kind of driver preference thing, but again, you got to be careful, because if you go too far, you end up like this, and you can't feel anything. Makes it really hard to go fast because you're missing out all that detail, all that information. But on the flip side, let's go ahead and turn this way down. We are way up in the stratosphere right now in terms of values. If you're running 15, depending on the car, that is a lot of force feedback. And this will depend on the car as well. But let's go down to 4. That's just about half of what we were running previously when we had a good setting. Again, pay attention to that meter. You can see it jiggling around a little bit, but I honestly can't feel much in the wheel. Yes, there's force feedback still, but it's very, very faint. There's not a lot of resistance when I turn into the corners. It's actually very unsettling because it is so weak. Now again, you might like a lighter wheel, easier to turn, but personally, I find this very isolated. It's like I'm driving with a piece of toilet paper. It just has that little strength. Why would you use a setting like this, though, that is on the weak side of where I think most of us would agree you want to be, aka the setting that gives the most amount of feedback but doesn't clip? You would use this type of setting, maybe not necessarily this strength, not necessarily this low, when you're oval racing. I find that is a place where you really want a low force feedback strength, because what will happen is if you run it too high, if you run it, at the maximum volume that you can, more or less, without saturating the speaker, in simple terms, then suddenly when you hit bumps, it can upset the car, it can unsettle the car. When you run a lighter force feedback, it will actually help kind of absorb those bumps, kind of like a extra suspension, if you will. So it's kind of a handy little thing to keep in mind, although again, you have to be used to it, you have to be ready for the fact that your wheel is going to be very light. That said, it is not a magic bullet, it's not something that you have to do to go fast at all. It's just something that can kind of help you a little bit on your way. So that said, hopefully you guys have a little bit of understanding with force feedback clipping and how to make sure that your force feedback is set up to give you the maximum amount of strength that your wheel can possibly provide you while keeping the detail that the sim is going to be providing your wheel, and actually having resistance but not too much resistance, and making the thing actually feel as realistic as possible with the hardware that you have. So hopefully you guys learned something. Bye.